you have a basis, on what kind of basis you have for making your decisions. Because by doing this, then I can pretty much gauge how you're going to vote on any particular bill or issue, or should be able to. Because I'm not going to know them all. I can ask you about some particular bills or something like that now, but there's going to be other bills and so forth that we don't have. So that's what it's for. So without that, and some of these could be better worded. I don't really have to give you that. So let's run through these. You've already answered some of them. So the first one, what is the conceptual foundation of the Republic and the Constitution?
Conceptual
Foundation of the Republic and the Constitution. You've already answered this.
Judeo-Christian principles.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah, Don said Hinduism. I don't know why. And the other thing that you have to understand on that is it simply was founded on the Judeo-Christian principles. It doesn't matter whether you believe in God or not. Those are the principles it's founded on. So
it is the truth.
yeah, I believe it. I believe it. It is the truth. But, what are the three constituent parts of the federal government?
The central government, the people, and the sovereign states.
How many did you give me?
3.
All right. Yeah.
The central government, the people,
Right.
and the sovereign states.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's absolutely correct. Most people miss out on that. A lot of our public officials saying that the federal government is the government that operates out of D.C. It's not. It's a combination of exactly what you said. One of the projects we have is going around the country trying to pass legislation or resolutions to fix the problem with the National Defense Authorization Act, which is a federal law that was enacted, citizen detention provisions. And invariably what we get from city and county officials is, why, we can't do anything about that. That's federal law. We don't have any authority or anything to say about that. We can't do anything about that. Well, not so. They're really federal officers as well. They're taking an oath to the federal Constitution. So, what is the twofold purpose of the Constitution?
It's to protect the citizens' rights, and it's to establish the government, the federal government.
Close. Pretty close, yeah. To set up the central government and to set limits on the federal government's authority. So, pretty close. So that you get.
And why,
Partial credit.
yeah, if you would, this is really important, because of everything we talked about this morning. Could you ask her that question again, and let her answer it again? You know, it's worth repeating. You know, I have a comment.
Okay.
What is the twofold purpose of the Constitution?
It's to set up a federal government, and it's to protect the rights of the people.
You're putting limits on it, on the federal government. So you're establishing this government, and you're putting and you're putting boundaries on its jurisdiction and authority. And the Convention of States application for an Article 5 convention, they claim it's a limited convention, and it's just to rein in an out-of-control federal government. Their application includes limiting the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. Well, that's the whole purpose of this Constitution, was to establish and put those limits there. And so if you're gonna apply for an Article 5 convention under this myth that you have to have a subject or an issue attached to your application, they've attached in their application a broad enough subject, and the subject is the entire Constitution. So whether you want to call it a constitutional convention or an amendments convention, the broadness of their application, you may go in with the intent of having a few conservative amendments to rein them back in. They talk about the general welfare clause or the commerce clause. Who knows what will come out of it? And if we have the same group of people that gave us the Affordable Care Act are sitting in control when an amendments convention is concluded, and those amendments come back, and they look at those proposed amendments, like what Hawaii has HCR 114, they wanted to repeal the Second Amendment. They wanted to make these individual mandate part of the Constitution. That's the kind of applications that are out there from the other side. So when you've got such a broad application coming from I don't have to worry about the Soros, the progressive crowd. I'm more concerned about the conservatives, what they're up to. And you don't hear much coming from the left about this convention process because all they care about is getting it triggered. They don't care who triggers it.
When you're solving a problem, one of the first things you learn is how to scope out what the problem actually is, right?
Absolutely.
Because if you scope it so broadly, you can never possibly succeed in resolving that problem because it has completely exceeded the scope and probably boundary of all the technical experts that are in that team. You have to make sure that you understand what your restraints are. And within those restraints, you can then solve the problem and be very successful at it. Most people think that restraints are very restraining, obviously, right? But in reality, that's where your most creative solutions come, is when you have been given those constraints. And then you can understand completely what you need to do to solve that problem and come up with the most creative solution possible.
I'm not a Six Sigma ninja, but I know in my work at NASA, I worked at NASA during the Columbia disaster, and trying to get to the root of the problem. I don't know if they include Thoreau's wisdom about chopping at the root of evil instead of whacking at the limbs. But Six Sigma focuses on the root of the problem. So does the Patriot Coalition. And we have a PowerPoint that we recommend not just to yourself, but to any candidate that's running for office. It's called the Dirty Dozen. And it's a dozen principles of liberty and on a problem identification. Because if we don't identify the right problem, we're not going to necessarily, unless we're playing roulette, we're just gambling as to whether or not the solutions that we're looking at are even addressing the problem, let alone have a chance to solve it. And with the kinds of things that require Six Sigma intensity and focus and attention on the details, we're talking about our nation's survival, or the lives of people and our astronauts, or our naval pilots, or Air Force pilots. There's lives on the line, not just the ones in the room or in the plane, but it affects this whole country and generations thereafter. So, if you were in my district, I would be pleased to know that you have that intensity of attention to detail, identifying the root problem. So,
Richard, go ahead.
What is the federal mechanism to keep the governments under control?
The federal mechanism to keep the governments under control.
Under control.
The people?
That's half there. You know, actually, the way it was set up, and I'd like to explain it this way.
Okay.
You can think of the Constitution as being a scale. On one side of the scale,
the scales of justice is
Yes.
visual.
right, scales of justice, and one side is the central government, on the other side is the states. On our table, we have a weight, that's the people. When something gets out of whack, the people are supposed to balance it out by going either to the central government or to the state governments to do that.
And the more out of balance it is, the more people it will require to bring it back into balance.
Sure. That's a great visual.
And that of course is part of the trouble with the Convention of States. What they want to do is to change the scale. When he talks about structural change, they want to change the configuration of the scale. They don't want the people to be involved. Of course, politicians don't want people to be involved because they waste your time. Public servants want people to be involved because then they know what they need to do. Okay.
And if you properly vetted your candidates up front to find out that you share common principles and values, then you'll know, you'll welcome the help when it shows up at the door. I tell you, when the Fire Coalition and the Patriot Coalition show up in Raleigh, or any state legislature where they know who we are, or on Capitol Hill, they either fear us or revere us. They either smile or they hang their head. They know we don't have a hidden agenda, we're not gonna bait and switch. And I'll walk in and tell them, we're not from the government, and we're here to help. And if we share principles and values, they welcome our help, and they reach out to us. And the ones that don't, they run and hide from us, like Mr. King's boss has done for literally from coast to coast. He will not debate Councilor Fry. In fact, a constitutional attorney from Tennessee, Patriot has done some outstanding research and writing about the principles of liberty and the Constitution. And Mr. Ferris refused to debate her because she wouldn't provide him with her law credentials. And yet he goes to Oklahoma and debates a window washer. So it wasn't about her credentials, it was about, she knew what she was talking about. We know what we're talking about. They run from the people who know what they're talking about and gravitate toward people who don't.
What is the implied assertion by one who takes Article 6, Clause 3 oath to support the Constitution?
That they know or understand the Constitution.
Absolutely, wow. What a concept. You're promising to protect it, and so the assertion is, of course, that you understand it.
Well, I haven't done a very good job of that.
No, you've done a very good job.
We're working on that.
We're working on that, that's right.
Way better than average, I'll give you that. And it gives you guidelines to study and to know what to fall back on.
Yeah.
That's the idea of this whole procedure that we're in with.
If you don't think there's a problem, then why would you ever want to fix it?
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, under the old, and I've looked at the historical documents on this, back in the colonial times at least, when you took an oath, what you were saying is, if God, if I do not fulfill my responsibilities under this oath, seek vengeance on me, give me retribution, and we're going to have you, so the time you take your oath, you won't have to worry about that.
That's right. There you go. Perfect.
The so help me God phraseology was kind of the kinder, gentler, God strike me dead if I don't.
How many oaths will you take prior to entering your office?
How many oaths will I take? That's a good question. I couldn't tell you that. I honestly don't know that I've ever taken an oath before.
You'll actually take two. Most people think that you take one, but you actually take two. You take an oath of office, and then you take the oath of support. And now I want to ask you if you can contrast those two. What are some of the characteristics of the oath to support as it relates to the oath taker, and then we'll compare it to the oath of office.
The oath to support one.
Oh, I'm sorry, the oath to support the
The
Constitution.
Constitution, I
Just
figured that was
for clarity.
implied, but I didn't.
Yes.
Okay.
And I said, it's not just for you, it's for any other candidate or anybody else that's helping vetting candidate or campaign managers. Everybody that's involved in the political process needs to, we need to be using the same terms and define those terms so that we know we're talking apples and apples.
So is the oath of office and the oath to support the Constitution given at the same time?
Yes.
It is, okay. And it's all done as a body of the General Assembly? Okay. So you're looking for the distinction between those two oaths?
Well, first I want to know what the characteristics are, and this is kind of a poorly worded question. I'm working on trying to get it better.
I see you're very intently trying to come up with something, okay.
But yeah, what are the characteristics of the oath as they relate to the oath taker? It's kind of what is the relationship between the oath and the oath taker?
Someone who's pledging allegiance and protecting. So in this case, the Constitution and then the oath of office.
All right. Well, all right. The first one is that it establishes a personal duty.
Okay.
Personal duty. It's personal to you and to you alone.
And it's an acknowledgement of that personal duty and responsibility.
It imposes an affirmative duty. So
you're affirming that you're going to uphold those values.
or protect. You can't just not violate it, the Constitution, you have an affirmative duty to protect it.
Mhm.
So you can violate your oath in what you don't do as much as in what you do do.
Or the amount of time that you're going to be in that office,
Well, that's a good question.
or in perpetuity.
Is there a difference? Which do you think it is?
Should be in perpetuity.
As a citizen?
As a citizen, yes, sure.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's another issue. The oath of office, the oath of office is limited to the term of office. The oath to support is not. And it does spring, basically, it does spring out of a citizen's allegiance under allegiance and protection.
Mhm.
So it's really more of a reaffirmation of that.
Can I qualify that perpetuity?
No.
We are on a time.
We say our rights come from God. So once we acknowledge a duty to God to protect those rights, not just for ourselves, but to our posterity, then our plausible deniability of that personal duty to God and to our fellow citizens and to future generations of Americans, we've acknowledged that we know better now. And since it is a personal duty and personal responsibility, it's like that age of accountability. Once you reach it, you're going to have to
No taking
answer it.
back. Yes.
So it never expires.
Mhm.
The last thing is that there is no geographical limit or really political limit on the oath of office.
Mhm.
And again, that's from being, you in essence would be a federal officer, because you're swearing to protect the federal constitution, so you're part of that component. The oath of office is different in that regard as well, because it is geographically and politically limited. And there's the confusion with the county commission and city when they say, well, that's a federal enactment, we don't have anything to do with that. Well, that's not true, because you have two oaths there. And under your oath to the Constitution, you do.
And county and city and local governments, they are political subdivisions of state government.
Mhm.
And that the other under Article 6, Clause 3 of the federal constitution requires it of all executives, federal and state. And as I said, political subdivisions under that state, county, city, local, and small town. They're under that requirement as well. So
each-
they don't have any clause, they can't say, not my job.
Each level of government has its own boundaries and restrictions and responsibilities. And those are
Right.
clearly defined. But in the end, we are all still supporting the one and only Constitution, whether it's the state Constitution or the federal Constitution.
You realize that once you get done with this, if we ever get done this afternoon, and you get elected, then you'll be qualified to teach a class,
That's
the
right.
other
That's right.
legislators, legislative assembly.
You've already answered this one. If you fail to fulfill your oath, what's the result? What's it called?
Perjury,
Yeah.
yes.
What's the degree of discretion one under oath to support the Constitution has in fulfilling their obligation?
You have no discretion.
Absolutely, no discretion.
Did you like hack his email? Most people don't get nearly as many of these right the first time. Some explanation of the
I've
question.
been mentoring.
Yes.
Good.
yes.
What is the definition or characteristic of a sovereign?
A sovereign meaning that I have the ability to govern myself and
Absolutely.
act for myself.
Right, inherent authority to govern one's own affairs and act in one's own behalf. What is the ancient inherent principle of sovereignty that establishes the mutual duties and obligations between a sovereign and its citizens?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. What is the ancient inherent principle of sovereignty that establishes the mutual duties and obligations between a sovereign and its citizens?
Subjects.
Or subjects?
To protect them,
That's one of them, yeah.
to pledge allegiance to them.
What it's called is, and you're getting all around it, I'm asking for the name of it. The name of the principle is allegiance and protection. And when you say allegiance, I pledge allegiance, that's what you're referring to.
Okay.
It's referred to 3 times in the Declaration of Independence, and at least Paul invoked it at least 3 times in the Gospel. So,
And as an example of the framers' understanding of that, in the Declaration of Independence, the indictments that they were making against King George were that he was no longer loyal to them, and that he had removed them from his protection. He had violated the allegiance and protection relationship, because it's a mutual thing. And, you know, this wasn't a coup. We didn't, the war for independence, the Declaration of Independence wasn't, you know, we wanted, they were saying, we have it because we no longer owe you any allegiance, and we no longer owe any protection of your sovereign authority because you have violated the trust and the relationship. And it's a two-way street. And that oath, the Pledge of Allegiance is to what? The flag is a symbol, and the republic for which it stands. And the republic is a constitutional republic. So it's just a few words, but it's deep concepts. And when you have, as a mother, your mother, you have a duty of allegiance and protection of your children.
Exactly.
And nobody should be getting in between you and your children. You know? And anybody that's ever done that knows what happens. It's not pretty. Women are nurturers and protectors by nature.
Moving right along, Richard.
What is the difference between the European feudal concept of allegiance and protection and the American concept?
Well, typically in Europe, they're governed by kings,
Exactly. Sovereign
dictators, leaders,
Right.
and then they have their subjects who are the people.
Right. The sovereign is a king or ruling body. In America, the people are the sovereigns.
Right, exactly.
So-
And the government is serving the people.
A mere servant. But don't tell them that because they get mad.
And that's why Dr. Skousen named one of his books The 5,000-Year Leap, because this American experiment was the first time in human recorded history in which the people themselves were recognized and acknowledged as the sovereign authority. And it wasn't individuals, it was we, the people, are the sovereigns.
Okay, what is the primary duty of any government?
To protect the citizens' rights.
Exactly. Not to protect the citizens, to protect the citizens' rights. It's a subtle difference, but it's immensely important. The NSA violates our rights to protect us, to provide security for us. They're not supposed to do that. They're supposed to protect our rights.
You mentioned a quote last night or yesterday that former President Clinton had said.
Right.
Before you share that, our current president, Barack Obama, this was sometime around the Boston bombing.
Oh, sure.
He said his #1 job was to keep us safe, and people cheered. And the founders, Mr. Kennedy had alluded to it, that it was Franklin who said, amongst others, that to give up liberty for security, you'll end up with and deserve neither. You won't get it. It will not happen. The framers looked at all the different forms of government throughout history. They spent 180 years from Plymouth Rock until the Philadelphia Convention.
What's your next question, Richard?
How many times is allegiance and protection referred to in the Declaration of Independence? This is a memory question because I told you this one.
I think you mentioned it was 3 times.
3 times.
Yes.
The preamble, to secure, it says to secure these rights, and they're referring to God-given and alien rights. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. Number 2, in the charge against the king, he has advocated government here by declaring us out of his protection. Protection is part of allegiance and protection. And waging war against us. You can't wage war against your own citizens, although they're doing it now, I guess. Conclusion, that these united colonies are, and of right, ought to be free and independent states, and they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown. And yet, probably 95% of the politicians I talk to don't really have any idea about allegiance and protection and how it relates to our federal government. Explain why there is no such thing as state nullification of federal enactments.
Well, if the law is unconstitutional, then we don't need state nullification.
That's
No,
getting close.
close.
Because under Article 6, Clause 2 of the Constitution, any unconstitutional enactment is automatically nullified. It's automatically nullified. And
But it's automatically nullified by this,
Constitution,
by the Constitution.
absolutely.
That's Supremacy
So
Clause.
the state doesn't need to go in and nullify it.
There's
because
nothing to
It's just being
nullify.
arbitrary, it's a moot point.
Yeah, there's nothing to do.
There's
There's nothing to nullify, exactly. But who determines whether it is unconstitutional? And it's-
Everybody that's taken an oath to support the Constitution that has to some way act on it will refrain from acting.
And to put this in layman's terms, your oath doesn't say to support and defend the Constitution once somebody else tells me what that means, or once somebody else makes the determination. It is a personal, active duty and responsibility. You have that working knowledge, then you have the skill or the tools that you need to make that determination. If you don't, you're either incompetent, or you're unqualified, or you're corrupt. So people, and this goes to the citizens, well, I'm not a person,
No.
I'm a public servant.
Mike,
It's
but
all
I have
part
a
of-
question about when the Supreme Court decided that the Affordable Care Act was constitutional. Now who has to uphold
Do you
that?
really want to ask that question?
Well, because,
Did the Supreme Court have the authority to hear that case on appeal?
but I guess what I'm
Was there-
getting at
what-
ultimately is, it wasn't constitutional until they declared it to be.
No, ma'am. And it wasn't constitutional for a variety of reasons. That remember what President Bush said, we need to suspend free market principles to save the free market? He said something to that
Yes,
effect.
right.
They suspended the Constitution to save us from the Affordable Care Act, allegedly. And people were preaching the praises. And this speaks to that sovereign. Who's the sovereign? The sovereign states on behalf of the people, the power that the people had delegated to the states on their behalf, said that when we get a grievance between us and the federal government, a sovereign can only be sued by its permission. And the states said, when we've got a grievance with the federal government and it enters into this federal court system that we created, the people in the states created it, we go to the front of the line. Alexander Hamilton said in Federalist 31, they would ill-suit the dignity of the state to have its grievances heard in an inferior tribunal. So Article 3, Section 2, Clause 2 says when a state's either a plaintiff or a defendant in federal court, it goes directly to the Supreme Court.
But as someone who takes an oath to uphold and support the Constitution, and the Supreme, and I don't believe that it is constitutional, how can I override that?
As a state officer,
Yes.
your duty was, and we wrote what we call the scarlet letters. Governor Brewer, Arizona's SB 1070 was in that same category. Eric Holder sued Governor Brewer in the state of Arizona. And we wrote, and he filed it in the lowest federal district court there is. And we wrote Governor Brewer. We informed her discretion about what her responsibility was and what her authority was under the Constitution. And she should have told Attorney General Holder, go pack sand. If you have a problem with my state or state law here, you file it in a court that has constitutional authority to hear the case. Go away. She didn't do that. And there's 26, 27 states attorneys general that signed on to the Florida lawsuit, did the same thing. And, Counsel Fry is our general counsel, but our senior legal advisor is a trustee of the U.S. Supreme Court Historical Society. And his law firm, he's been practicing before the Supreme Court for decades. His law firm offered, and we went to every newly elected Republican state attorney general and Republican governor after the 2010 elections, and offered to try the case pro bono. Wouldn't have cost those states a dime if they would file the case according to what their oath required, directly in the Supreme Court, and not drag that out for 2 to 3 years. No takers.
But at this point in North Carolina, we have, we, being the Republican Party, has the majority.
Right.
The House, the Senate, the Lieutenant Governor, the Governor, and this.
The governor,
The
the
judges,
lieutenant governor, and the legislature
So
have a
why
duty to
are
reject
we-
the Supreme Court ruling that on the grounds that the Constitution does not grant them the authority to hear the case. Forget the merits of it. They didn't have the authority to hear it on appeal. North Carolina, even when North Carolina, as part of signing on to the federal Constitution, extended some authority and power and jurisdiction to the federal government, they still had the same duty of allegiance and protection of our rights,
Sure.
regardless of whether they did their job in Washington or not. Just because they didn't do it, even if it was especially,
That's what I'm getting at. So why aren't we then, why do we still have a health exchange?
follow
in
the
place?
money.
So it's all about the money. So if we had rejected the money, we wouldn't have a health exchange.
Money and power. I mean, there's several factors, but it's people.
But I guess I'm just trying to understand.
What the state leaders should do is everything that they can not to assist the federal government and to, in fact, hamper the federal government in establishing that exchange in the state. And then,
But see, I just need to know what I need to do. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? I just need to know what it is that I can do in that office to turn that around. It sounds as if it is impossible to turn around because clearly we are in a position in this state to have all of our ducks in a row to turn that around, and we're not doing it.
right.
So it's only because of the money that we've taken that we have
Well-
to follow that law?
No, that's not correct, because if the law is unconstitutional, somebody bribing you with money to do it doesn't make it constitutional.
I understand that, but that's the reason why it's in place now.
Right. Well, what you need to do is those things need to be defunded, the exchanges need to be torn down,